I started sort of traveling to ancient sites in 2020. So in 4 years, I've managed to go to Egypt 3 times,
Jesus.
ancient Turkey, sort of
Yeah.
like because there's two sides of Turkey. There's like the very great vacation, brand new, sparkly side of Turkey, and then there's the ancient stuff that's all down near the bottom.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and I went all the way to Easter Island, which was the furthest
Oh,
I've ever traveled
yeah.
ever. Took
That's
20 hours to fly there.
Jesus Christ. Oh, I would be losing my goddamn mind.
It was painful. I hate flying as well.
Oh,
I feel like a bit like Bilbo Baggins because I love adventure and I'm so interested, but I also love being home and I don't
yes.
like traveling and I don't like too many people. So I always feel like Bilbo Baggins on my adventures being like, oh, why is it me? But then
Oh,
when I'm there, I love it and it's
yeah.
amazing.
I'm a Bilbo bastard as well. Like
Yeah.
that's me for sure, except for the adventures. I like learning about adventures. I don't like going on them, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah, no, for
Like,
sure.
yeah, like I love reading about, you know, ancient history or just history in general, but I hate traveling so much.
So have you traveled, because you're based in America, right?
Yeah, I'm in Texas.
So, have you traveled around some of the ancient sites of America, or have you kind of sort of
A
stayed?
few, yeah. So I've seen, like when I was about 18, I went to Vegas, which horrible idea to go when you're 18, but
Hmm.
on the way you go through like Arizona, Nevada, so you see like the Painted Desert, Petrified Forest, all these things. But there's these like ancient sites that are like these 13,000-year-old like basically remnants of different
Hmm.
like Native American tribes, and there's like the wall art, like not cave paintings, because they're not in
Yeah.
caves, but yeah, just like, and you're just seeing like this bison drawn onto this rock that's just sitting there by the road, like there's like
Hmm.
it's not I don't know, it's just like it felt like I was like walking in a living museum in a way. So I have seen a little bit of that, and then
My
there's like the mounds and yeah.
my next, like, if I'm my on my top list of where I want to visit next, I really want to go to Montana, and I want to
Uh-huh.
go and check out. There's like a kind of the megalithic wall of Montana. So it's
Yeah.
completely up for debate. It's on private land, so you have to get like special permission to go and visit. But I think they're quite open for people to come and have a little poke
Yeah.
around. But it's just really fascinating because it's one of those like probably a natural formation, but if it was a man made structure, it
Mhm.
completely rewrites so much of like pre-American history. Um,
Yeah.
and it's so hard to tell from the internet when you can only see it like from certain photos or certain videos, but I
Yeah.
really want to see it with my own eyes. And not that I know much about rocks myself, but
Yeah.
that's my top places to get out to Montana.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I need to look into that one. I don't think I really know anything about that.
It's like this weird structure of basically a wall that I think it goes on for quite a while, and it's super straight, looks like a wall, and
Yeah.
it's built of sort of maybe 3 4 layers of rocks, and some
Mhm.
of them are pretty looking kind of brick shaped, like big
Yeah.
blocks, like big megalithic block work. Because obviously you have like very ancient megalithic walls in South America,
Mhm.
but they haven't found any yet, to my knowledge, in North America. And so if the Montana one ends up being something that kind of the same period of like all the megalithic stuff that you found down in Cusco and Peru, that would just be really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it would make sense. I mean, they were in North America before South America. So you would think that like a lot of those things that exist in South America were kind of carried on, or well, kind of
Hmm.
existed first in North America. I mean,
Well,
to some
even
extent, not
yeah,
all.
no, for sure. I mean, it's completely walkable. What's really weird is when you see ancient wall, like there's like a megalithic wall in Easter Island, and there's only one on the entire island. Everything,
Yeah.
all the other rock structures on Easter Island are kind of more like Neolithic style rock
Mhm.
structures, like lots of little stones piled up to make kind of caves and monuments. But there's this one big megalithic wall called Vinapoo, and it's exactly like Cusco, and it's so
Yeah.
weird because historically those two cultures were never supposed to interact.
Right.
But clearly someone did. And was it like the rock builders of ancient South America? Did they manage to get all the way out to the middle of the Pacific Ocean and find Easter Island and build just one wall? Or
Yeah.
was it one guy pass who had like the knowledge from his grand? I don't know. Your brain just goes
Yeah.
thinking of like, how the hell did it get all the way in the middle of out here?
I mean, it has to be the people from South America, though, isn't it? I mean, that's how they got to Easter Island.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, recently, I did a little bit of research into the most up to date genealogy, because you can
Mm.
kind of track where people traveled roughly with
Yeah.
genes and DNA, and they found a whole um, in a French museum. I think it was
Mm.
French. They had a bunch of ancient um, Rapa Nui like cadavers, bodies.
Yeah.
And they agreed, the Rapa Nui community agreed that the scientific community could test them and do like a genealogy. So they
Yeah.
were legit ancient Rapa Nui people. And when they did the genealogy test on them, they found out that they had 10% South American DNA. So they were clearly traveling back and forth and mixing, clearly,
Right.
because they had shared DNA.
Yeah.
Somebody's daddy was South American.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting because it blows the whole theory that they couldn't travel like that
Mhm.
far, 3,000 miles out into the sea, but
Yeah.
clearly they could. So
God. Whenever you like read about things like that or learn about things like that, do you put yourself in that situation as like, could you imagine how goddamn terrifying it would be?
yeah. I
Like,
mean,
I mean, I would lose my I mean, I'm not a big, ocean traveler in general,
yeah.
not a big fan of the ocean at all. Anything above a swimming pool, in size, anything above a
Hmm.
swimming pool, maybe even a bathtub, not a fan of. So to think of these people in these, like, I'm sure they were
Oh,
very well-built boats, but to think of them traveling so far and oh god.
it would take weeks. You'd be on this tiny boat for weeks with people, animals. Like, I mean, it's one thing to keep enough food, but like, how do you even begin to take enough water? And how do you know for sure that you're not going to get lost? And
Yeah.
it would completely freak me out. Easter Island did freak me out a little bit in
Mhm.
terms of when you stood and you looked into the distance. It really was. It was like Water World. There was nothing
Yeah.
for thousands of miles, and it was like, okay, this is this is terrifying.
Yeah. I see Easter Island, that's the video that when I watched, I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is like my dream." Is like out of any I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily out of any like ancient site, but it's got to be up there with the one that I'm the most interested in actually
Mhm.
visiting and just seeing these, these giant heads.
Fully recommend. If you can get out there, it is Easter Island. It's a Polynesian island, and
Mhm.
so it's very Polynesian in its culture. It's one of the only places where it's like an ancient World Heritage site, but at the same time, it's also completely in like the modern world. So everybody has cars and phones, and
Yeah.
but they're very deeply ingrained. Everyone also has like native tattoos, and
Yeah.
they they keep using all of the culture and the words, and
Mhm.
um it's interesting. And I did think, I was like, man, imagine if my culture had kept all its like indigenousness, and so like in London there's like druid, everyone has like
Yeah.
druid art, and
Right, right.
there's like Merlin shaped King Arthur. I was like, it'd be cool if
Yeah.
we could incorporate a little bit even more of our past in our current, modern day.
Yeah. Well, there is I mean, there is to an extent there's a pretty large amount of it, I would suppose, I would think. Because you have like
Uh,
Stonehenge is arguably one of the most I mean, one of the like when people think of, you know, Britain and think of like ancient history, together, that's what they
mhm.
come up with is Stonehenge. I mean, there's like little things like that. And
We are quite good actually. There's so many castles in England. You could throw a
yeah,
stone and you hit a castle.
yeah.
We have a lot of stone circles. But it's sadly, like for people who live here, because I guess you get a bit
Mm,
desensitized to it. It's a lot of tourists. Um,
yeah. Yeah.
and because like I grew up not even blinking at Stonehenge, and it was only in the past like 5 years when I've really got into ancient history that I've
Yeah.
appreciated it. Before I used to pass it every year, like on the highway, and just be like, "Oh look, it's Stonehenge." Be like, "Yeah, right, Dad."
Yeah.
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 But now I appreciate it and now I love it. But
Yeah.
yes.
Well, because also a lot of it goes back a little bit further to like, more Scandinavian, like Viking culture as well. Because
Mhm.
that's where it gets a little bit tricky, I think, with a lot of just what I imagine, like with the UK history, is like how much of it is like that sort of Viking Nordic influence, and then how much of it is like Druid or like Saxon and like all these
Um,
different groups.
so a lot of the Viking um and Saxon history,
Mhm.
it got a little bit wiped out after 1066. 1066 is like the big date that we learn in
Right.
history.
Is
I'm
it the
not sure
Battle
what
of Hastings? Is
that
that
is. Yeah.
okay? Yeah.
And we learn about that. It's like when we're doing sort of kids history, because
Yeah.
that's the day that the Saxons lost and
Right.
the Normans won and the Normans took over. And then very much medieval England is influenced by the French. Like the language literally turns
Yeah.
French. English
Right.
is seen as like the serf language, the poor
Yeah.
language. And we get a lot of, still today we have like words that are from the French Norman thing, like
Right.
can't think any off the top of my head. Oh yeah, like
Uh,
naming animals. So like
yeah.
beef
Right.
is from the French, like
Boof.
buff, and
Yeah.
yeah, and so they started to adopt like the
Yeah.
posh French
Well,
stuff.
and pork for
Yeah,
pork is the
yeah,
same. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's porc, like just pork in French. But
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
veal, and they
Yeah,
would pick
yeah.
like um and yeah, so a lot of like the kind of Saxon and Viking influences were swept away, and it was all Norman stuff, and the Normans built the stone castles, because before it was all like wooden long halls and
Yeah.
thatched roofs, and none of that survives. So all of the stuff that we have that survives today is actually due to like the Norman kings coming in and
Right.
building castles out of stone properly. And um, so yeah, but I happen to know a bit more about the Saxon Viking stuff because when
Mhm.
I was a teenager, I spent my time. I joined a like a living history society. So you if you're like a enthusiast and you spend your weekends basically dressing up a bit like a Renaissance festival, but
Yeah.
like this is like serious history. Like all your clothes need to be period accurate. All
Right.
of
Right.
the weapons are like completely historically accurate, and you do like living history shows for the public. So I did that for a couple of years when I was a teenager, and we would do time period from like Viking, Saxon, early Norman invasion,
Yeah.
kind of everything up to like from Beowulf up to Robin Hood was like our time period.
Gotcha.
And I
Yeah.
had great fun dressing up as a Maid Marian and all that.
That's a good time. So would I. Yeah.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
Um, and then there was also like at the same time there was LARPers, like live action role
Yeah.
play.
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
they were kind of like the nemesis of the reenactors, because the reenactors were like really full of themselves, being like,
Right.
"We're accurate, and we don't have wizards."
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
secretly really wanted to be a LARPer because it looked
I
really fun,
know.
and
That's
I was like,
that's I'm kinda because Texas, there's a huge Renaissance fair, a big Ren fair every year in
"Oh, is
Texas,
there?"
massive one. Yeah, 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 and I wanna go because I feel like I would get into that so
Yeah.
hard, but I saw some pictures that, I had some friends who went, and in the background, you see a middle-aged guy in, like, a Budweiser T-shirt. It's like, well, now, hold on a second. Like, I think I'm now kinda I don't know if I wanna do this yet. I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
If you're gonna do a Ren fair, like you have to commit. Like
Yeah.
like you can't
Yeah.
go half in. I think you look sillier if you've got like a sword tucked into your Budweiser t-shirt. Like if you're gonna
Exactly.
go for it, like go for it. We don't have so many Renaissance fairs over here. We have Comic Con.
Oh, yeah.
Um that's quite big over here. And so
I
that's
was saying, yeah.
completely normal to see. um you know Everyone starts to fill the trains and things with like really cool costumes. So that's sort of our cosplay equivalent of a Ren fair over here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well, yeah, I mean, we have like all those different kinds of like comic cons. There's like manga and anime cons, like all that kind of shit. Not a
Mm,
big into any of that real that stuff in general, but yeah, like I go to Ren Fair. We have medieval times, which is pretty close. I don't know if you're familiar with medieval times, but
yes, I think I went to medieval times. I went to Florida when I was a kid,
oh yeah,
and I loved medieval times.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, and you get to, I think, yeah, you get like the colored night, and then you get to,
yeah.
and you get to eat. Yeah, I loved it. Loved
Oh, it
it.
was amazing. I was like in my mind, the last time I went, I was like pretty young, and I remember thinking like we went wrong somewhere. Like this
Yeah.
is how things should be.
Why
Like
are we not eating in a mead hall? Everybody. Yeah.
yes, yeah, why am I not watching people, getting lanced to death,
Yeah.
I mean, granted, they didn't actually die. Unfortunately, which, to live up to it, they should have, taken one to the eye like, what's his name? Um,
Yeah.
one of the kings did. I can't remember who it is. One of 'em did.
Harold Godwinson.
That's it, there he is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we should have had something like that going on, but still,
Yeah.
all in all, a great
He
time.
took an arrow to the eye. What a way to do what a way to go.
Yeah, but
Um,
there was one who was jousting and took a shard, like a shard of wood into the eye, and it got infected and died.
oh,
It was,
no.
it was a Henry, but not a
Oh,
Shakespeare Henry and not the fat Henry. It was a different one.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Henry number 4.
yeah.
Um,
Maybe, who knows? Yeah,
but, oh,
yeah.
what a way to go. No, I mean,
Oh,
there's some pretty, like, awful historical deaths that I'm like, glad that wasn't me.
I
But,
love them. That's one of my favorite things to learn about. It's just, like, creepy, weird shit from history. And,
like,
I mean, so speaking of, like, Battle of Hastings, so, like, William the Conqueror, have you ever heard that story about his funeral?
no, his funeral, no.
Wait, that is William the Conqueror, right? Battle of
Yeah,
Hastings?
he's the
Okay,
one that
okay. He's the
won, yeah.
Norman. Yeah, yeah. So, apparently, around the time that he died, William the Conqueror just started gorging himself. Like, he, like, got huge, massive. So, by the time that and, a lot of the times with kings, like, they obviously start planning a funeral way before they're dead because it's this
Mhm.
massive event, which, I mean,
Yeah.
they still do. I mean, they were planning, Queen Elizabeth's probably back in the '70s. But,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So they had his done, had a huge, immaculate, like, stone coffin ready for this guy, but he had gained so much weight they couldn't shove his fat ass into the coffin. So they were like, yeah. So they were like, oh God, what do we do? So then they had to make like a new one, pretty like shitty one, still wasn't big enough. And they just started stuffing him into it. And because he had, it was decomposing, he had so much gas buildup
Just
that he exploded on everyone. The whole crowd just
oh,
covered in bits of
it's the
William.
king.
Yeah.
You get a
Yeah.
piece, then you get a piece.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like a Gallagher show.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
That's
disgusting.
yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's not
there's
the
that.
one. Um,
That's how I want to go out. I mean,
in an explosion.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm already getting this, the size is already there. I've been doing that since I was about 4. But to just ruin everyone else's day, you know,
And just be like, "Guys, this is gonna be a comedy act getting me in the ground."
that's that's what I want. Yeah.
Do you know what that talking of, like, Queen Elizabeth's, like, death, right?
Mhm.
Because, yeah, I grew up with a queen my entire life. It's still quite weird that we have a king, I keep
Yeah.
forgetting, and
Yeah.
she was
He
just
does
there.
too, I think. But
She
yeah.
was so much part of, like, the culture here. It's a queen, it's Queen Elizabeth. And yeah, I remember as she was getting older, hearing about what the protocol would be if and when she dies, or when.
Mm.
Um, and it was supposed to be, it was called London Bridge is Falling Down, and that was
Yeah.
going to be the code, that like the BBC, or to stop the panic before things come out. So yeah, and then they had BBC had like pre-recorded like documentaries and tribute sort
Yeah.
of things that were going
Oh,
to
of course.
immediately take over everything. But then they had to keep updating them because then they got a bit outdated, and
Yeah.
so it was somebody's job to keep making tributes to the Queen before she died. And she actually like she lived to 96. Like she was
I
a bit of a legend.
I wonder how many people worked on those videos who
Mm.
died before she did.
I know, right? You'd be like, we have to keep rehiring because she just lives for so long.
I know. They were like, "God, I can't wait to see my work in action." And then,
Yeah.
40 years later, like, "Holy fuck, like, it's gonna be me."
It's
Yeah.
crazy. I
Yeah.
remember I was at a friend's wedding in Malta,
Mhm.
and we were on the runway, and we were taking off, and it was as you're like kind of 10 foot, 20 foot in the air, and you're just turning
Yeah.
your phone off, and someone goes, "The Queen's died." But then we but then I had like a 2-hour flight to London, and
Yeah.
we were like, Was that a joke? Was that real?" Like, "No,
Yeah.
she's died." "Okay, I mean, I guess she's old, you know." And then we
Yeah.
landed, and it was weird because Heathrow Airport is normally like in London, it's normally
Mhm.
like super busy and it was
Oh,
just
yeah.
eerily quiet, and all
Yeah.
of the advertisements everywhere, all of the screens had just gone black and just said like RIP Queen Elizabeth, and we were like, okay, she's died. And then
It is.
it was like this really somber wait to collect the bags. And then I heard this conversation between two strangers, which I think like summarized kind of the two polarity points from the whole country.
Mhm.
Someone was like, "Oh, have you heard she's dead? Oh my goodness, isn't it awful? I feel so upset." And another woman was like, "Don't care, didn't like her." And I was like, "Oh," so yeah, you either
Yeah.
like were really upset or you really didn't care. And that was kind of how
Yeah.
everybody felt over here.
That's what you wanna be. It's like when Michael Jackson died. That's kinda how everybody was, you know?
Yeah, he was
Yeah, yeah.
a king of pop.
Yeah, the king
So
of pop, which
royal in a
arguably
way.
very much royal, and was
Yeah.
doing some of the things that the royals tend to do as well, or allegedly. But, yeah, that's, yeah, yeah, that's a yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know why in my head I just imagine everybody hates her, but I think it's because I hear the, like, American filtered version
Oh yeah,
where it
maybe.
is
Yeah.
people who, because in my mind, I did not know people liked her at all. Like,
Okay.
I
Yeah,
thought I
no,
thought everybody hated her.
there's some strong, like, royal fan clubs over here.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by him. I obviously watched The Crown,
Oh,
religious.
yeah,
Incredible. Like, I am endlessly fascinated by the royal family, but not just the modern ones, with old King Chuck, but like
the
the
historical ones.
yeah, the whole history of it is just fascinating. With Queen Victoria,
Yeah.
she had sex 9 times a day with Prince Albert, and would
No wonder she was so upset when he died. Like,
yeah,
she was
tell me about it.
absolutely like, mortified.
Yeah, she turned
Um,
into like what's her name from Great Expectations, Miss Havisham.
was
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and she was in mourning for like 40 years, and
Jeez.
and the England went into mourning with her, and then she like didn't come out of mourning, and everyone was like, "Well, I can't come out of mourning if a queen doesn't come out of mourning," and so everybody just stayed in black for like 50 years, and it became, death chic. Everyone was just like, "Yeah, we love talking about death,"
It became
and
a goth country,
yeah,
goth Brit.
The Victorians were, like, obsessed with death, and I don't know if
Yeah,
it would have, like, hit that hard if Queen Victoria had stayed her husband had stayed alive and she'd stayed happy, because I don't think we
yeah.
would have gone that, like, emo. Um,
No, but
but
emo's a good way to be. I'm a big fan of the goth subculture, so
yeah.
I don't blame her. Yeah, yeah, I'm a big Bauhaus fan. Yeah, but yeah, apparently they would have sex 9 times a day, and sometimes she would get into like massive, like she had massive migraines if it was like less than 5 times. Like she would go into like basically convulsions. And,
Wow.
yeah, he would, like, interrupt meetings with, like, prime ministers or whatever, to, like, basically say, "Hey,
Sorry.
we gotta get this
I
going."
gotta go and service the queen. It's top priority.
Yeah, I mean, and
Um,
amazing, like,
it the royal family is a weird one because I'm not like I don't know where I sit on the I'm not a royalist, like, I respect the historicalness of the
yeah,
royal family, and I think it's kinda cool how they are, like, so directly related to massive historical figures. I'm like, "Well, they
yeah,
really are your, like, great, great, great grandma." But I think that obviously society's changed massively.
mhm,
The whole point of a king or a queen is that you are literally God's appointed person, and that
yeah,
the magicness of that, as we've become a state where we're like separate with church and state,
mhm,
and as like our Prince William has like openly come out to say now that he doesn't go to church. So I'm like, well, you're going to be king, and the whole point of you as king is God's appointed person, but you don't go to
yeah,
church. So who are you? Like, what's the point now?
yeah, yeah,
And so I think that in the next sort of 2 generations, I think the royal family are gonna run out of steam, because they really can't, do the job title, which is being God's appointed That's
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it's all going to
That's interesting.
change.
I've never really thought, I mean, like, I know that that's like kind of the historical base of it. I never really think about that being the modern, like that still exists as like the modern,
It's it,
role,
it's
which
still
it's
the point
supposed
of
to
it.
be. But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
they are the head of the Church of England still to this day.
Yeah.
It started with Henry VIII, and
Right, yeah.
it's still King Charles. But it's yeah, it's kind of becoming a little bit more and more redundant
Yeah.
um, as a nation, people are becoming more and more secular and multi-religious, and it kind of doesn't represent like the public anymore. So I
Yeah.
do think that that's going to crank down and fizzle out. But I think we're going to keep all the history of it, and it's going to become
Yeah.
more of like a museum dynasty thing. Kind of already is, but
Yeah. 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 As it should.
yeah,
I think that's a pretty good way to look at it, because you shouldn't, I mean, there is like a very rich history with the royal family. Like, it's not like something that, you just kind of toss aside. Like, you got to still have some respect for it, like
yeah.
the historical significance of it. Yeah. 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 It's crazy
Do you
that King Henry VIII, basically started a religion so he could get a divorce. And then,
basically?
yeah. And then Joseph Smith started a religion so he could have more wives. I mean, it's very interesting how,
I mean, it's a lucrative business. Basically, these guys are going. Do you know what? It'll be easier if I just start a religion.
yeah.
It's easier
God,
than dealing with the culture at the time.
she must have been insufferable if he's like, God, I'm going to start an entire religion just to get away from you, you know?
Yeah,
Like
it's
a
like,
Jada Pinkett almost.
or I think it was less about the first wife being insufferable, and it was more that he really fancied Anne Boleyn.
Wow.
He really wanted to marry that one, but he couldn't because
That's,
he still had the old one. So it was more
yeah.
like because he never killed the first one, he just
Yeah,
divorced
that's
her.
true. Yeah.
But then I think it was like probably a massive case of like lust and just a big mistake of
Yeah.
mistaking um, what his pants wanted and not him because
Yeah.
he killed her the next one, so
Yeah. Well, do what you got to do, I guess. I
that's
mean,
um
yeah.
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 Do you have a
Until,
favorite a monarch? Do you have a favorite king of history or queen?
oh, that's interesting. Actually, it's not even I think, Prince Philip is interesting. So not even, like actual
Oh,
mon I think Prince Philip's an interesting fella. I also think Princess Margaret's pretty interesting.
yeah, she's pretty cool.
But yeah, but then going back, I mean, probably Henry VIII. I think
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like everybody's if they go back enough. But Queen Elizabeth, the original, she's, that the prequel, I guess, that's a good one.
yeah,
But Queen
the
Elizabeth,
OG.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially at the time when like culturally women were like so low on
Yeah.
the respect list, but for her to then be queen and then refuse to get married, and was like, no. Um, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
She's pretty iconic.
What about
And
you?
um, not a queen, but
Okay.
the first person, but kind of like a leader before there were like kings and queens.
Mhm.
Um, Boudica or Boadicea. Do you
Uh-huh.
know her?
No.
So she was I remember learning about her when I think I must have been in like second grade or something. And it was like my first history lesson with like a workbook. And I learned about Boudica, Queen Boudica or Boadicea.
Mhm.
And she basically she was like a druid queen in the
Okay.
Dark Ages. And she led this massive fight against the Romans because it was the time when the Romans were coming in and
Yeah.
killing all the druids and taking over England. And she like commanded the army and she like was winning and she was winning all these fights again. And I remember as a kid being like, oh my god, she's so cool. And there's a big statue we have of her in London because she's famous. She's on this like horse chariot and she's
Mhm.
riding the horses like into battle and she led all these men and these druid men like properly respected her. She obviously could do like really good battle strategy.
Yeah.
And then it ended horribly because she was doing really really well and then the Romans, she had two daughters and they took her daughters and they like um, assaulted horrifically her daughter,
Yeah,
possibly killed her, and she ended up she took poison and took her own life because she was like, "You're not going to get me." So she went out big
that's badass.
in a big badass. Yeah, it was really cool.
That's
So
awesome.
I think she's my favorite queen because I'm like, yeah, she led like at the
Yeah,
front of the battle.
that's
Um,
awesome.
and Boudicca, and I was like, I'm surprised that there hasn't been like a bigger movie of her.
Mm,
That Hollywood hasn't really kind of because it's got all of the spicy
yeah,
ingredients.
right, right. Does
Um,
it bother you if so speaking of movies and like historical movies, does it bother you if you notice an inaccuracy in a movie?
yeah, because so my degree, I did my like what I'm trained in is I did costume for film and theater, and
Okay.
in that I did history of costume.
Mhm.
I like my little like weird party trick is that I can kind of see clothing from any timeline and I can know like roughly when it is. Or so I'll be watching things and it'll annoy me because I'm like, ah, that's not accurate. that
Oh,
that
yeah,
corset's like 50 years too, or whatever, or like the tailoring's not right on that jacket. So
yeah,
so it does annoy me actually when especially when things are like yeah, less so now than it did like back then, but I
yeah.
can see it and like other people and it's fine. But I think it was Les Miserables, the movie,
Mhm.
and I was watching it and then I was saying to my friends like, "Oh, did you like notice how they actually aged all of the corsets up like and it 30 years and they changed all the designs to like fit the period." And everyone's like, "No, I didn't notice that, Johanna." And I was like, "Okay, well, I thought it was pretty cool."
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I appreciate when something's like on and it annoys me when someone's got like plastic or something that just didn't
yeah.
like zips. There were like zips in the backs of costumes, and it's supposed to be like
Oh,
Robin Hood, and I'm like, I don't know.
right, right.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. It doesn't really bother me that much, but there are some where I'm like, "Well, why did you change that?" Like
Mm.
like Braveheart, Braveheart, the movie is completely different than what William Wallace actually did, or, at least like
Oh
the
yeah,
kinda setup, like the whole background's like, you could have made it just like
accurate.
what happened. And it's a
Yeah.
fascinating story. And really all anybody wants to see is Mel Gibson putting blue paint on and, not saying something anti-Semitic, which is a great, thing to see on camera. And, and then you want to see him get his, balls cut off at the end or implied that he's getting, drawn, quartered and
Yeah.
castrated. Like that's all that you really want to see in that movie. So why fool around with all the other stuff?
I mean, weirdly, so much of like the historical accounts, it's like there's enough drama there. Like it's almost like you couldn't write it. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, that actually happened.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, sometimes you don't need to make it up. But then I do give people like I mean, I love movies and I love film. I'm a
Right.
massive
Yeah.
cinephile.
Same.
So I also like the latest Gladiator, like the historical accuracy of like was there sharks in the thing? No, but like
But they did
was
fill
it?
it with water.
They did fill it with water. Yeah.
Which is, really annoying the hell out of me with so many people saying that they hate it because they show it being filled with water. I mean,
No, the water
obviously
thing, fine.
well, I know, but so many people think that that's so they're like, "Oh my god, this is so stupid." It's like, well, no, they did do that. They just didn't have
Yeah,
tiger sharks swimming around.
like
It's a little hard to transport a fucking shark.
the
Um,
Romans were like the king of aqueducts and moving water places. Like
yeah,
they knew how to contain water. In fact, like oh, this is a good question. I always say like if you were gonna have to, change periods and you were gonna have to live in another time, like what time would you pick and why? Um,
yeah.
I got like the Greek Roman time. It has some pluses for me purely because of like the toilet and irrigation. It's like the
Yes.
closest thing to the modern day.
True. Yeah, they did wipe their ass with a sponge on a stick, which I think we should bring back, to be
I mean, it's
honest.
very eco, isn't it?
Yeah, and just I mean, for if you're a larger fella, it's a great thing to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just I might just start doing that now and just carrying the stick around with me everywhere I go and
just
you know?
pass
Yeah.
the sponge.
But
But
apparently it was like, decently hygienic also because like
yeah,
the sponge cleans because it stays in the water. Like it wasn't like a as disgusting of a thing. Like they had some things figured out. They were
yeah,
definitely
like
backwards on a few things. Like they thought,
they.
malaria was just poisoned air, which is why it's called malaria. But yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah,
because humans. I get why, but like before people understood about bacteria and things,
yeah,
I could get the sense of like, oh well, it's going to come in through like my nose or something, and if you just
yeah,
block it, then that's it. But no, it's not
yeah,
bad smells. It's not where
yeah.
that's just the warning. Um, it, yeah, I think hygiene wise, all of history is like what compared to today,
Oh,
but
yeah.
um, and medical care, that's another thing. Um,
Well, for medical care, you don't want to go back any further than about 15 years ago.
I know,
I mean,
right?
they stopped. I mean, they just started giving babies anesthesia like 25, 30 years ago.
I know yeah, sometimes, I look back and I'm like, I'm not even, like, that intelligent, and even I could kinda know that, like, even babies feel pain, like,
Yeah, because if you
surely not.
smack one in the mouth, it
They're
hurts. Not
like
that I've done it before, but,
but they yeah, like, I no,
sure.
I dropped my brother when I was little, like, smack on the floor. Yeah, he
Yeah,
screamed and screamed, like,
yeah, what a
they
shock.
they feel
Yeah,
pain. They feel like they're sensitive to, like, the cold, like, why would they not feel it's bizarre. I'm like, how am I
yeah.
more intelligent than, like, a 1930s doctor?"
A
Um,
1970s doctor. I
even
mean,
yeah,
this
even
is, like,
70s.
recent when they started
I'm
doing this, like
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm so, so glad that I live in, like, the modern age of medicine, and we are
God,
living in, like, the best. If you ever had wanted to have a shot of fixing an ailment, we are
mhm,
living in the best time.
yeah.
Just the idea that, like, things that people used to do, like the leeching or, like, bloodletting, you feel really ill, and the doctor's like, "What we're gonna do is we're just gonna bleed you,
Yeah,
make you feel even better."
that's how George Washington died.
Oh, did he bled out?
Yeah, they bled him to death because he was sick, he had a flu, basically, and he had a couple doctors come, and they just kept taking blood out, and then he, became, like, basically severe anemic and
And
died.
just
Yeah. I mean, turns
um
out if you just drain half of someone's blood out of their bodies, they tend to not recover that well. So,
yeah, it's we only have like
yeah.
I thought we had like a decent amount of 20 pints or something inside of no, we have like six.
Yeah, it's not a
It's
lot.
it's not a lot. So you need every single drop that you can get.
No.
Um, but yeah, just this sort of idea of just having no idea about bacteria.
Yeah.
I was looking today because my other favorite time period that of
Mhm.
history that's just like one of my favorites. I like Victorian times.
That's my if I can go back, that's mine,
Yeah,
is Victorian
the
England, yeah.
Victorian England because of the just the change that happened that century from the Industrial
Yeah.
Revolution. I like the fact that it's so completely alien to our culture, but it's actually like my house was built in 1900. Like it
Yeah.
just got in there on the Victorian, and I'm like, so my house is Victorian, but yeah, and so I like Victorian history, and like if I was going to do a decade, I'd say the 1880s. I like Jack the Ripper times. I like the fashions. I like the kind
Yes.
of turn of the technology. But so I was like having a little look today, and I'm refreshing myself on like Victorian factoids and things and looking at the whole situation of how London got its sewer system
Mhm.
and how the fact that nobody had any clue that if you drink sewage like you get really ill and die. Nobody. Actually, no, there was this one doctor
Yeah.
who I think he was called John Snow, I think.
I
And
think it is, yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
Jon Snow, and he was like the one guy that clocked that was like, people tend to be dying of cholera around like water pumps. And so he had this theory, and he was like, I know, I'm going to break off the handle of this water pump in Soho in the middle of London
mhm.
to stop people from drinking it, and I'm going to see if like people stop dying, and everyone stopped dying. And then when they like investigated it, they realized that the water pump shared like it was connecting to a
Yeah,
cesspit in the back of someone in somewhere in Soho, and the cesspit had like cracked and was basically like infiltrating the water pump, and that's why everyone was dying when they were having a little bevy at the water pump. And
Jesus Christ.
he wrote a paper on it and was like, "Oh my God, look, here's the proof, and here's what happened." And everyone just went, "Nah," and just kept chugging the sewer water. And nobody cared. It was only when it started to affect the rich people.
Yeah.
And it was like the smelly summer of 1858 or something, and the River Thames was so full of sewage,
Yes. Yeah.
and it stank so much that Parliament were like, "Okay, we've got to do something about the poo." And then finally they built the sewer system, which is still in use today. Like my toilet is connected to the Victorian sewer system that was built in like 1850, which is kind of concerning because it's coming up to like 200 years old. And
Yeah.
at some point, all of London's sewer system, and obviously there's more and more and more people keep living in the city. It was built to
Yeah.
sustain like less than 1 million people, and we're
Right.
now getting up to like 8-9 million. At some point, the whole system is just gonna like implode, and I'm like, oh God. So
Yeah. That's gonna
that's
be a
fun.
rough day.
That's gonna be horrendous,
Yeah.
isn't it?
You know what's crazy is that how good y'all were at doing those things, because I tell you what, here you got to get your plumbing fixed every about 5 or 6 years. So
Oh,
either y'all
really?
just yeah, because nobody knows what the hell they're doing, and things
Mm.
just were built better back then. Like now, I don't know what they're building these pipes out of, but I think it might be paper. Like, like it doesn't seem like it's a
That'll
real.
last a year. Oh, no, it's true. So, like I said, my house is built in 1900, and it
Yeah,
is structurally so sound.
crazy.
If you bought a house in, especially in my area in London, a lot of the original housing was built around the 1900, up to the Edward, maybe 1910, and I've lived in a house before that was built post Second World War, like the
Uh-huh.
1940s,
Right.
and those houses now are literally falling apart. Like they are getting rot because the materials, they completely didn't build it out of stone and proper brick. But
Yeah.
all of the brick Victorian houses are gorgeous, and they're
Yeah.
standing up 100 years, 120 years later. So if you're going to buy a house in London, get one before the war, because
Yeah.
post the war it's all going to fall down. And like new builds, it's the same thing. A lot of new builds, it just will not last. I feel like this house will keep going for another 100, 200, 300 years.
Oh, at least.
So,
Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy. That's what I've always wanted, just have like a Victorian
mm,
mansion kind of thing, and I could just walk around in like a black suit and
a
basically just
cigar.
yeah, and just yell at people who got too close. Like that's
Yeah,
that's my dream in life.
it's a
Yeah.
good one.
Actually, so if you could go back in time
Mm,
and get an answer to a question from history, what would it be? Like to know definitively that this is what happened and how it
right.
happened.
Um, Now I want to go back to the Giza plateau, which is where the
Mhm.
pyramids are
Yeah.
in Egypt, and I want to go back at the very first dynasty, or when we think the very first dynasty of Egypt was,
Yeah.
and I want to see what's there. I want to see for sure, are there any pyramids at that point?
Mhm.
Because according to like all of our most recent academics, the pyramids were built in the
Mhm.
fourth dynasty,
Yeah.
just a very specific couple of years right then. Um, and then they couldn't really make them past the fifth dynasty. Nobody could make pyramids anymore. Like they
Mhm.
never could work out how to do it, like the original group of pyramids. And I just want to know, like, when were they built and how? And I want to see if they were there at the beginning of the dynasties, or were they there from before. So I'd go there for the day, and I'd try and find someone who knew anything about the construction.
And then
That's
you would
fine.
have to and then you wouldn't be able to understand a fucking word they're saying. So
No, I'd have to
it would
like
just go
draw
over
it in the sand and be like, how pointy.
your
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
um,
That's a great one. That's a great pick. I wanna go and I wanna know who Jack the Ripper was.
oh
That's
yeah,
mine. I mean, I know it's not as, like, big of a thing, I just
it's
want
pretty big.
Well, yeah, but compared to, like, pyramids, all the
Mm,
rest. But, like, yeah, I wanna know. Like, I wanna know who
who
this son of a bitch was. Is it the
yeah.
guy, I think it was, like, a Czechoslovakian immigrant
Mhm.
who that I think most people think it is. Is it him? Is it somebody else? Like, I wanna know.
Is it someone more internal? Yeah, Jack the Ripper, I lived in Whitechapel for a bit,
Hell yeah.
just before, like, 2020, and it's a shame because Whitechapel today is so
Mhm.
it's so different. Everything in fact,
Wow.
there's literally, like, nothing left of, like, the sites. When you go on the Jack the Ripper walking tour, it's a
Yeah,
little bit boring because there's none of the buildings left. They just take you
yeah.
to, like, a random street and go, "Here."
Yeah,
Um
yeah, and all the prostitutes are alive, which is different.
but
Yeah,
they look very different.
yeah,
And, and yeah, but I was really fascinated in that because that whole Cheapside, the Docklands, Limehouse, it was just a different world entirely. And it was just mad that there was this, like, nutter running around knifing people.
yeah.
Um and they could never solve it. And what's interesting, I did do, like, a little bit of research into Jack the Ripper because it's
Mhm.
been glorified a little bit in kind of, like, fiction and movies.
Yeah,
It was really interesting to know that they weren't all prostitutes.
yeah,
um
yeah,
and actually a lot of the women were they were just divorced, older. Some of them had drinking problems. They were just sort of like normal women,
yeah,
but they got, like, scandalized and kind of slut shamed, and but you didn't care about them as much if they were prostitutes. But a lot of them were
right.
just in boarding houses because that's what you would do. You try and save up a penny to stay in a boarding house
Mhm.
if you could overnight, and they would bunk together sometimes. Women would bunk with women, and it was, yeah, it was really interesting how when they, like, a lot of people have been fact checking and going,
Yeah.
oh wow, they were kind of like normal women. And one of them, unfortunately, like, she didn't have make enough money to get the boarding house, so she fell asleep in a door frame and was just, like, in, and he killed her, like, in the door frame. And I was like, that she
Jesus.
was basically just on the streets for the night, and
Yeah,
kind of wasn't her fault. And
the wrong night.
on the
Yeah,
wrong night in the wrong place. And what's
yeah.
really scary as well is, like, the questions that were flying around in 1888. Well, what was she doing out alone then? Well, it was her fault for being alone on a doorstep.
I know.
And it's kind
Interesting,
of
isn't
the
it?
exact same things that when a woman gets attacked today, people go,
Yeah,
well, why was she out of the house at night after 9 p.m. on
uh,
her own? And it still isn't quite like, no, dude, it's the
yeah, yeah,
weirdo with the knife who's like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not her
Because
fault.
she should be able to walk outside completely naked at 2 in the morning.
You should be able to
Should
sleep
be
on
able
any doorstep
right. I
if
mean,
you so
you
choose.
should be able to do
But
anything you want without having
but
to worry about some guy stabbing you in the fucking
it's
neck. Like, it's
yeah,
yeah.
it was a lot. And also it's very he wasn't even like a stab and run,
No.
he, like,
Cut the genitals out, I know,
he
and on a few
mutilated.
other
There was,
things.
like, grapes in the eyes and all kinds of weird. He was putting
Mhm.
things places that they shouldn't have been, and it was definitely not, there was something way more sinister. I can
Yeah.
understand why people thought that the guy was, like, surgically trained because he knew things about
Oh,
anatomy that potentially doctors would know.
yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Well, that's the connection with, like, H. Holmes. So I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but that
Mm.
was the guy in, like, the Chicago World's Fair in 1893 that basically built a murder hotel that had, like, trap doors and secret passageways, like, basically holes in, like, paintings where he could spy, like Scooby Doo,
Oh
and,
yeah.
yeah, and killed a bunch of people who were just staying at hotels. But he was a guy who would, um, like, grave rob and sell
Mm.
bodies, to, like, the science community because that's how they would use them for classes and lectures and stuff like that, and he could make money doing that. So he wasn't even doing it necessarily out of, like, like a serial killer gratification of, like,
Mhm.
murder. He was just doing it to make money, and he was a complete scam artist. But there's a lot of people who think that Jack the Ripper came to the US and then he was
Kept
H.H.
going.
Holmes. Yeah, yeah, that's, like, one theory, but I
I
think it's
mean,
pretty well disproven.
he went
That
somewhere. Like, why
well,
did
yeah,
he stop?
everyone goes somewhere for
He
sure.
went somewhere and did something.
Yeah.
whether he was like stopped by accident. It'd be really satisfying if something happened to him, like, like really bad accidental, and he was the guy that got kicked in the head by a horse and fell off a train or whatever. It'd be like,
That'd be a
haha,
good one.
karma.
Yeah.
But just annoying that he never really got brought to justice. And yeah, that's dark times. That's also scary. Like, it's scary when you look back in the past and realize how easy it is to commit a crime because you don't
Yeah.
have things like forensics.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's still easy now. It's like only like less than 2/3 of murders get solved. So like
that's
if you
crazy.
murder someone now, you have a 1 in 3 chance of getting away with it scot free. Like that's
Yeah,
terrifying. So and that's with all the advances in technology we have. So
tech and
think about 1888. Like, I mean, you could do it in front of a cop, and probably they'd be like, I didn't get a good look at him, and you're
yeah,
good.
like I couldn't see in the smog.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it is kind of scary. And like thinking back into history, like in medieval time, things when there weren't even police. Like if
Yeah.
someone decided that didn't like you and they were going to come for you, um, and the whole system that they had, I believe, when things were like more medieval, is that
Mhm.
people would, if someone thought someone had killed someone else, they would kind of like, just as a little village decide, so you'd kind of all be like marched down to like the pub, and then
Yeah.
there would be like a kind of very quick jury of being like, well, did you? I think you did. Or, oh, like, yeah,
Seems like a killer
terrifying.
to me. I don't know. And then God forbid, you accidentally, did something wrong to somebody, and then they're like, "Yep, he
Yeah.
did it." Like, but I mean, they did have like some form of law enforcement 'cause they had reeves, which
Mm.
that's where like sheriff comes from. It's like a shire, the reeve of a shire reeve sheriff.
Oh, is that
But
where sheriff comes from?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because so like a reeve was basically, I mean, they did more than just policing, but that was,
Yeah.
I mean, it's also where like coroner comes from because they would have the reeve would have an assistant who, like anytime there was a dead body called out, somebody's
Mhm.
like, hey, we found one. If the sheriff or the reeve was busy, he would send out his assistant, and that person was he held some title, I can't remember, but it's like coronet is the last word, which the crown, so corona, crown.
Yeah.
But it was a person who basically like did random duties for the crown, the royal family. And so then Corone became coroner, and he was the guy that became the coroner.
The
Um,
coroner who does the dirty stuff, looks at the
yeah, yeah,
bodies
because the
and
sheriff was like, I'm too busy for this shit.
the one period of time that I would not wanna go back to.
Okay,
Ab
yeah, that was my next one.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um, I would not wanna go back to any time of, like, witch hunting trials, because
you'd be done.
I would
Yeah,
be done. I'm an outspoken, chatty woman, and
yeah.
like, I have ideas, raw, and
Oh
and
god,
I just find the whole thing so unfair because there was logic went out of the window, superstition, fear. There you couldn't logic yourself out of that. If somebody like a guy could accuse you if he fancied you, could accuse you of being a witch because he's like, she's making me think impure thoughts. And I'm like,
yep,
no, dude, that's you. Like, that's literally you. And there would be no way. They're like, well, how to their methodology for disproving your witchness, it was
yeah,
just completely stupid. It's like, well, let's drown her, and if she drowns, she's not a witch, and if she pops back up, she is. So let's kill her
yeah,
again. It's like,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, I mean,
so
seems fair to me. I don't know. Yeah,
so
I know it's
wouldn't
wild.
yeah,
Yeah,
wouldn't go there. And anything
that's
like
a rough one.
freckles, I'm a very moly person. There would be like
Hmm.
devil marks all over me.
Oh, yeah, yeah. God forbid they start drawing on them and find something they don't need. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
good.
Yeah,
And
I wouldn't, because they did kill a few fellas in that
mm,
time. There was especially like in the U.S. and Salem, there's a fellow named Giles Corey or Giles Corey, depending on how you pronounce it. But he was a
mhm.
guy who basically was like, "Yeah, I don't think any of this shit's true." They're like, "He's a witch." Like
He's a
just
witch.
like I know you're a guy, but you're a witch. And they crushed him to death, like with a stone, or it's called pressing to death, but they just kept putting
Yeah,
stones on his stomach, and his last words were more. And they just kept putting him on because he was like, "Yeah, I'm not admitting that
what a
this shit is
legend.
true." Yeah, he was all, I mean, awesome, but I feel
Yeah.
like now, granted, I would not have done that. I would
No.
after one stone, I'd been like, all right, you're right. You're
No.
right. Like, yeah, I was I'm not a like a brave person.
Yeah.
But I do feel like my interests, like I'm a bit, into like heavy metal and stuff. I would have been.
Mm.
I mean, it wouldn't have existed in the time, but I would have been playing like a lute and played, the wrong chord.
From
And,
the devil's music there.
well,
You're
yeah, there's like the
encouraging
devil's.
dancing.
Well, that's one. There's actually was a chord progression, the Devil's Triad. That was
Yeah.
it's three notes. If you played them in sync, it was considered blasphemous, and that's Black Sabbath. I don't know if you're familiar if you're a big like
Yeah, yeah.
but Black Sabbath, the song Black
Ah,
Sabbath, the dun, 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 like that's the Devil's Triad. That's why it's in that song.
devil's
But
chord.
yeah, it's
And
awesome, and it sounds terrifying.
I also like not only do I have like a big mouth or whatever, but I also I joke and I'd make way too many sarcastic jokes and it would you can't take it back and it would it would be a nightmare. And I so that's one period of time not want to go to.
Yeah,
Like
the Wild
sidestep.
West is one I'm not going into. There's just too much going on and too
Oh
much
yeah.
dirt, and I don't like dirt.
Yeah.
It just everything seemed real dusty and
Dirt.
dirty. I don't
Yeah.
like all that.
Gritty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It just doesn't seem. I mean, I'm fascinated by Billy the Kid and like some of those like outlaws, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to be around all that bullshit. Yeah, I think like medieval times would be interesting, like some of the. But I think I would love to go to the Renaissance, like in Italy, like in Florence,
Yeah.
Mecca of the Renaissance, and see like Michelangelo and
Sistine Chapel as it's being done.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, that
the
would be cool.
Medici's.
There is a very cool series. I think it came out last year, and it's called The English. It's Emily Blunt, and it's
Mhm.
set in the time of like the Wild West. But I thought it was a really good gritty series that doesn't um glorify the whole cowboy and thing. And
Yeah, yeah,
Emily Blunt plays a woman who and a British woman who is going out to America getting the revenge on her rapist and she's finding him in the world. And
that's awesome.
it's
Yeah.
so good, but the realism of the violence
Mhm.
and how it's not quite the same as like Back to the Future 3 because that was what I was envisioning like for the
Yeah.
Wild
Well,
West.
that's I mean, pretty accurate in
um
a lot of ways. I mean,
but
yeah.
that I really recommend that series called The English. It was a BBC series, but I think you can get it on
Yeah, yeah.
Amazon and places. And I thought that Emily Blunt was amazing, but it really showed as well. And I've never really seen things like the real things of syphilis and gonorrhea and all of that stuff because
Yeah.
it's like everybody had it and you never see it in movies but to be accurate if you're going to be historically accurate any time around those times
Mhm.
there would be like 7 or 8 people that wouldn't have a nose because of syphilis or
Yes.
gonorrhea or like people's limbs were falling off and
Yeah.
this series like really accurately brought that to the forefront and I was like oh yeah um
Yeah.
sexy time in the past is not that sexy.
No.
Ugh,
That is a good point because they never show that in any movie set in the
they
past. They
never
never show
show it.
somebody with syphilis. They never show somebody just grabbing their crotch and going and screaming
Yeah,
because that's what half of the population would be doing
yeah,
24/7.
and now you can cure most of all this stuff, but
Sure
but
can.
and like and that's the thing, like nobody really knows who's got what because it's like you can treat the symptoms, but
Yeah.
back then, like if you got it, it's a death note on your head, and
Yeah.
it's just how much time until all your organs
Yeah.
fall out.
Oh,
And yeah, it's never addressed in movies. All the historical movies, I bet you could name like hundreds, and nobody properly addresses it. Um,
yeah.
and so I was like, "Ooh, if ever I make a historical movie, I'm just gonna make sure that like
A
a lot of the
couple.
characters have a couple of characters,
Yeah.
sprinkle the gonorrhea and the
Yeah.
syphilis,
Well, yeah.
and
Yeah.
just the
Just
realism there."
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like
but
your Dave
yeah,
Navarro. Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, because normally they'd have like holes in their head. I mean, that's where like the whole wig, the wearing the big
yeah,
wigs comes from was, because all the royals had fucking massive syphilis scars. Al Capone, that's how he died, was from syphilis. Are you familiar with Al Capone? I mean, I'm sure you know who he is and all that, but like he was the bootlegger, during Prohibition and
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
I was
he ended
picturing Al Pacino for a minute. I'm
well,
like, oh,
you're not
oh
far
no,
off actually.
yeah, Al
But
Pacino.
so Al Capone, spent basically the last years of his life riddled with syphilis, and he gotten out of prison, and he would sit on his diving board of his swimming pool fishing into his own swimming pool. So there's that. Syphilis, it'll bring down the top,
I think
nobody's
I
safe.
think Mozart died from syphilis.
You know, okay, Mozart could have. I think
I'm
if I
not
I honestly believe that Mozart was legitimately autistic, like severely autistic. 'Cause if you
Yeah,
look at like the way he interacted with people,
yeah.
it's just there's no way someone who isn't autistic would act this way. But he also did some of the funniest shit ever. Like he wrote a damn piece of music and called it "Lick My Ass," which is
Yeah,
hilarious.
he loved the toilet jokes. I did a play once,
Mhm.
Amadeus, and so that's why I'm,
Oh
like,
yeah,
remembering
it's a
about
great one.
Mozart.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
watched the movie and then I did the play, and, yeah, he was, like, prodigal child genius, and it
Mhm.
definitely lends to, like, neurodiverse. He definitely, I would say, autistic. In fact, it's
Yeah.
amazing when you look back at probably if you went back and met a lot of historical people, how many people that today we would recognize as like neurodiverse, ADHD, autistic,
Oh
and be
yeah.
like, oh yeah. And I bet a lot of like war generals had the tism and
Oh
were like,
yeah. Oh, it would just
um,
be a bunch of Greta Thunbergs running around, like, that's
yeah,
pretty much what it is. Like, I mean, so another little Mozart one, which I know we're running out of time a little bit, but, are you okay on time? Or,
yeah,
like
yeah.
okay. So Mozart also there was a woman who was in the opera, had apparently massive, cans, to use a technical term,
Oh
but,
yeah, yeah.
so Mozart wrote a piece of music designed specifically for her to play the piano and have to cross her arms a lot because he liked watching from the other side and seeing her boobs mesh together.
Autistic and a pervert. Hmm.
I mean, it's the greatest
Um,
combination ever. It's
yeah.
that's what you want. And but yeah, like Mozart was just a
Yeah,
fascinating fella.
yeah.
Like that's yeah,
But I'm pretty sure I mean, I think he definitely got syphilis 'cause he was a
yeah.
he was a man about town. But,
Oh yeah. Oh, I would have been done. Yeah. I mean, it would take it about 3 days. You'd be seeing me with my nose off. Oh my god,
Just like,
yeah,
nope.
I'd look
So,
like
yeah,
Lil Kim. Yeah.
time machine, I go back, but just the rule is you don't touch anyone,
Yeah,
like, and then
yeah, yeah,
syphilis
social
everywhere.
distancing the
Yeah,
whole
literally,
time.
social distancing in time
God,
travel is number 1 rule.
yes.
Um But, yeah, that's what a weird, lovely route this, conversation we've talked about
Yeah, that's how it tends to
sewage.
be. Yes, a lot of sewage talk, a
A lot
lot
of
of
sewage and a
yeah.
lot of syphilis. That's what we call this one podcast, sewage and syphilis with
I mean, it is kind of the theme of a lot a lot
of
of what I
history.
talk about. Well, and just what I talk about on a day-to-day basis is either
Yeah.
sewage related or syphilis related. So this has really just felt like home to me. But
Aw.
no. Well, I thank you. I mean, so much for coming on. This has been a great time. This hour
Fun.
flew by.
Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
I love talking about history.
well,
I
yeah.
started making content because, like, my friendship circle, like, not so much
Mhm.
into the history stuff, so I
Yeah,
was kind of reaching out. I made a channel because I wanted to, kind of find a community of people that just, like, love talking about history
yeah,
and mysteries and, the what ifs and the and, yeah, so
yeah.
definitely found my people online.
And such a fucking great channel. Like,
Thank
it's
you.
so good. Yes. And please, before we go, plug, promote the name of the channel, where people
Oh,
can find
yeah,
you, all that good stuff.
I'm TikTok, Instagram, YouTube at Funny Old World. I used for a couple of years online before I did history stuff before the pandemic. I did like sketch comedy online because I'm an
Yeah,
actor and so I did sketch comedy for a couple of years and then in the pandemic I fell down the rabbit hole that we started this conversation in, and I just found
yeah.
I went down YouTube rabbit holes of ancient history and stuff, and then I kind of decided to pivot my content because I just became I caught the bug. Um,
Hell yeah.
and I'm still really fascinated like 5 years later. So yeah, funny old world and yield like OLDE, yield
Yes.
world.
It was the old, like the Y was pronounced with a TH back then.
Oh, yeah, no, I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, anytime somebody says, like, "Oh, ye old coffee shop," or whatever,
No,
it
it was
was it was the old.
the
Yeah,
old. Yeah,
yeah.
fascinating.
Interesting stuff. I mean, really going out with a bang on that. But, yeah, no, I've had such a great time, and please, if you ever wanna come back, I would be more than
Oh,
happy
yeah,
to
amazing.
talk
Thank
about more
you.
sewage and syphilis, which
Yeah, I'll research more sewage and syphilis facts, and then we can really really
please
go
do.
in.